Welcome to True.
What really happened to Amelia Earhart? On July 2, 1937, somewhere over the vast Pacific Ocean, the world lost contact with its most celebrated female aviator. Amelia Earhart, along with her navigator Fred Noonan, vanished without a trace during an attempt to circumnavigate the globe at the equator. Their disappearance sparked what would become one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century, captivating generations of investigators, historians, and conspiracy theorists. Despite decades of searching, countless expeditions, and the application of modern forensic technology, the fate of Amelia Earhart remains one of aviation's greatest unsolved puzzles. The woman who captured America's imagination. To understand the magnitude of Earhart's disappearance, one must first appreciate who she was and what she represented. Born on July 24, 1897, in Atchison, Kansas, Amelia Mary Earhart grew up in an era when women were actively discouraged from pursuing careers outside the domestic sphere. Her childhood was marked by an adventurous spirit that defied conventional expectations for young girls of her time. She climbed trees, hunted rats with a rifle, and kept a scrapbook of newspaper clippings about successful women in predominantly male-oriented fields. Earhart's introduction to aviation came on December 28, 1920, when she took a 10-minute plane ride at an air show in Long Beach, California. The experience transformed her life. By the time I had got 200 or 300 feet off the ground, I knew I had to fly, she later recalled. Within days, she had begun saving money for flying lessons, working various jobs to fund her passion. She took her first lesson on January 3, 1921, from female aviation pioneer Anita Neta Snook, and purchased her first plane, a bright yellow Kenner Airster biplane she nicknamed the Canary, just 6 months later. Earhart's rise to fame accelerated dramatically in 1928 when she was selected to become the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean as a passenger, though she described herself as merely a sack of potatoes on that flight, piloted by Wilmer Stoltz, with Louis Gordon as mechanic. The media frenzy that followed transformed her into an international celebrity. The press dubbed her Lady Lindy, drawing comparisons to Charles Lindbergh, who had made his historic solo transatlantic flight just a year earlier. Dissatisfied with being celebrated for something she hadn't actually done herself, Earhart became determined to cross the Atlantic as a pilot. On May 20, 1932, exactly 5 years after Lindbergh's flight, she took off from Harbor Grace, Newfoundland, in her single-engine Lockheed Vega. Despite mechanical problems, icy conditions, and strong northerly winds, she successfully landed in a pasture in Northern Ireland after a flight lasting nearly 15 hours. She became the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic, and only the second person after Lindbergh to accomplish the feat. This achievement cemented Earhart's status as an American icon. She was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross by Congress, received the Cross of Knight of the Legion of Honor from the French government, and was honored with the Gold Medal of the National Geographic Society. But beyond her aviation records, Earhart became a powerful symbol of women's capabilities and potential. She wrote books, gave lectures, designed a clothing line, and served as a career counselor at Purdue University. She used her fame to advocate for women's rights and to encourage women to pursue careers in aviation and other fields traditionally dominated by men. By 1937, Earhart had already established herself as one of the world's premier aviators, with numerous records to her name. She had set altitude records, become the first person to fly solo from Hawaii to California, and was the first person to fly solo nonstop from Mexico City to Newark. Yet she harbored one more ambitious goal: to become the first woman to circumnavigate the globe at its widest point, the equator, a journey of approximately 29,000 miles. Planning the final flight. The world flight was conceived as much as a publicity venture as it was an aviation challenge. By the mid-1930s, several pilots had flown around the world, but always via more northern routes. Earhart wanted to accomplish something different, something more challenging. The flight was sponsored by Purdue University, which had purchased a Lockheed Electra 10E for Earhart to use as a flying laboratory. The twin-engine, all-metal aircraft was one of the most advanced planes of its era, capable of carrying enough fuel for extended over-water flights. The preparation for the journey was extensive and expensive. The Electra was fitted with additional fuel tanks that gave it a range of approximately 4,000 miles. It was equipped with state-of-the-art navigation and radio equipment, including two-way radio communication systems operating on multiple frequencies. The plane's empty weight was about 15,000 pounds, but fully loaded with fuel, supplies, and equipment, it could weigh over 25,000 pounds. Earhart selected Fred Noonan as her navigator for the journey. Noonan was one of the most experienced navigators of his time. He had been the chief navigator for Pan American Airways, where he had pioneered many of the routes across the Pacific Ocean. He had surveyed routes from San Francisco to Manila and was intimately familiar with Pacific navigation. His expertise was considered essential for the most challenging segments of the flight, particularly the long over-water stretches where visual landmarks would be absent and celestial navigation would be crucial. The original plan called for a west-to-east route, departing from Oakland, California, and making stops across the Pacific. The first attempt began on March 17, 1937, when Earhart, Noonan, and two additional crew members departed Oakland. They successfully reached Hawaii, but during the takeoff from Luke Field in Honolulu on March 20th, the Electra ground-looped, swinging around in a circle, and sustained substantial damage. The exact cause of the accident was never definitively determined. Earhart claimed a tire blew, though witnesses reported seeing sparks from the right wheel, suggesting the landing gear may have collapsed. The damage was severe enough that the plane had to be shipped back to California for repairs. The accident was both a financial and logistical setback. The repairs cost approximately $25,000, equivalent to nearly $500,000 today, exhausting much of the expedition's budget. Moreover, the seasonal weather patterns meant that the original west-to-east route was no longer feasible. When Earhart was ready to try again, she decided to reverse the route, flying east to west. This decision would prove fateful, as it meant different weather conditions, different political situations in some of the countries she would overfly, and, crucially, a different approach to Howland Island, the tiny speck of land in the Pacific that would become central to the mystery of her disappearance. The journey begins. On June 1, 1937, Earhart and Noonan departed Miami, Florida, beginning their around-the-world attempt. Their route would take them south to South America, then across the Atlantic to Africa, through the Middle East and South Asia to Southeast Asia and Australia, before attempting the challenging Pacific crossings that would bring them back to California. The early stages of the journey proceeded relatively smoothly, though not without incident. They made stops in Puerto Rico, Venezuela, Brazil, and crossed the Atlantic to Senegal and West Africa. From there, they continued across Africa, stopping in Chad, Sudan, and Eritrea, before proceeding to Pakistan, India, and Burma. Each stop provided opportunities for refueling, rest, and necessary maintenance on the aircraft. Throughout the journey, Earhart sent back dispatches to the New York Herald Tribune, and her progress was followed avidly by the American press and public. She described the challenges of flying in monsoon weather over Burma, navigating by the stars across Africa, and the exhausting nature of flying for hours in intense tropical heat. Photographs from various stops show Earhart and Noonan beside their Electra, sometimes looking weary, but generally in good spirits. By late June, they had reached Lae, New Guinea, having completed approximately 22,000 miles of their journey. Only about 7,000 miles remained, but these would be the most dangerous miles. Ahead of them lay the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, with its notoriously unpredictable weather, few emergency landing sites, and the constant threat of navigational errors in an age before GPS and modern electronic aids. The next planned stop was Howland Island, a tiny coral atoll in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Howland Island measured only 1.6 miles long and half a mile wide, essentially a speck in the ocean, covering just 460 acres. Finding it would require precise navigation and favorable conditions. To assist Earhart and Noonan, the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca was stationed off Howland Island with instructions to provide radio direction finding assistance and to generate smoke signals that might help guide them to the island. The last days in Lae. Earhart and Noonan arrived in Lae, New Guinea, on June 29, 1937. They remained there for 3 days, preparing for what everyone recognized would be the most challenging leg of their journey. The 556-mile flight to Howland Island would take approximately 18 hours, nearly all of it over open ocean with no visual landmarks. If they missed Howland Island, the nearest landmasses were thousands of miles away, and they would have no hope of reaching them before their fuel ran out when... During their time in Lae, several concerning developments emerged. The Electra's radio equipment had been problematic throughout much of the journey. The trailing antenna, which would have enabled long-range communication on lower frequencies, had been damaged earlier and was no longer functional. This limited their radio communications to higher frequencies, which had much shorter range. Moreover, there appeared to be confusion or miscommunication about which radio frequencies would be used for communication between the Electra and the Itasca. Earhart expressed concerns about the radio equipment and cables sent from Lae. The radio direction finder, which could have helped them locate Howland Island by homing in on radio signals from the Itasca, was reported to be functioning poorly or not at all. Some historians have suggested that Earhart didn't fully understand how to operate all of the radio equipment, though others dispute this, pointing to her experience and the training she had received. Weather forecasts for the route to Howland Island were mixed. Reports indicated possible headwinds and overcast skies along portions of the route, which would complicate celestial navigation. However, the weather wasn't considered severe enough to warrant postponing the flight. On the evening of July 1st, 1937, ground crews topped off the Electra's fuel tanks. Various accounts suggest the plane was loaded with between 1,000 and 1,100 gallons of fuel, which should have given them approximately 20 to 21 hours of flight time, a comfortable margin for the expected 18-hour journey to Howland Island. Some excess baggage was left behind to save weight, including a parachute. The final takeoff. At 10 a.m. local time on July 2, 1937, which was 0 o'clock GMT July 2nd, but still the evening of July 1st in the United States, Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan climbed aboard their Lockheed Electra at Lae Airfield. Witnesses reported that the plane was heavily loaded, and its takeoff run was longer than usual. The Electra used nearly the entire length of the runway before lifting off. According to some observers, it even briefly disappeared from view after takeoff, sinking below the level of the airfield as it struggled for altitude over the ocean beyond. However, it was soon seen climbing steadily to the northeast. Several people in Lae heard radio transmissions from Earhart in the hours immediately following takeoff. At 2:45 p.m. local Lae time, a radio operator received a message from Earhart stating that they were at 7,000 feet and reporting their position. This would be one of the last clear position reports anyone would receive. As the flight progressed through the night and into the early morning hours, the Itasca began listening for transmissions from Earhart. The ship had been sending weather reports and homing signals, but it's unclear how many of these Earhart actually received. Radio propagation in the Pacific could be unpredictable, and the limitations of Earhart's radio equipment, combined with possible operator error or misunderstandings about frequencies and procedures, created a communications nightmare. The final hours. The final radio transmissions from Amelia Earhart rank among the most analyzed communications in aviation history. The crew of the Itasca heard from Earhart multiple times during what should have been the final hours of her flight, but the transmissions were fragmentary, often partially garbled, and increasingly frantic. At 2:45 a.m. Howland time on July 2nd, 7:42 a.m. GMT, Earhart transmitted, "Cloudy and overcast." The signal was strong, but the transmission was too brief for the Itasca to get a bearing using their direction-finding equipment. At 3:45 a.m., 8:44 a.m. GMT, another transmission was received, but it was mostly unintelligible. The Itasca responded with its call sign and asked Earhart to respond on the same frequency. There was no indication she heard them. At 4:53 a.m., 9:53 a.m. GMT, Earhart transmitted, "Kak-Yu calling Itasca, we must be on you, but cannot see you, but gas is running low, been unable to reach you by radio, we are flying at 1,000 feet. The transmission lasted about 10 seconds, not long enough for a bearing to be determined. At 6:14 a.m., 11:14 a.m. GMT, Earhart transmitted, "We are circling, but cannot hear you." Again, the transmission was too brief for direction finding. At 6:45 a.m., 11:45 a.m. GMT, perhaps the most famous of Earhart's last transmissions was received. "We are running north and south." The signal was reported as the strongest yet received from the Electra. The final transmission came at 8:43 a.m. Howland time, 1:43 p.m. GMT. Ka-Q, calling Itasca. "We are on the line 157, 337. We will repeat this message. We will repeat this on 6,210 kilocycles. Wait, we are running on line north and south." The signal was very strong, suggesting the aircraft was relatively close, but again, the transmission ended before the Itasca could get a bearing. After this transmission, there was silence. Despite continued efforts by the Itasca to raise Earhart, no further communications were received. The world's most famous female aviator had vanished. The search begins. Within hours of Earhart's last transmission, the United States Navy and Coast Guard launched what would become the most extensive air and sea search conducted to that date. The Itasca immediately began searching the area around Howland Island. The reference to line 157 to 337 inches in Earhart's last transmission was interpreted as a line of position running northwest to southeast through Howland Island, suggesting she was somewhere along that line, but didn't know exactly where on that line Howland Island was located. The battleship USS Colorado, the aircraft carrier USS Lexington, and numerous other vessels were diverted to join the search. 66 aircraft from the Lexington flew search patterns covering approximately 250,000 square miles of ocean. The Colorado launched float planes to search islands in the Phoenix Group, located to the southeast of Howland Island along the 157-337 line. The official search continued for about 2 weeks, until July 19, 1937, when it was called off. No trace of the Electra, Earhart, or Noonan had been found. The U.S. government had spent an estimated -$80 million in today's dollars. In a report to the Treasury Department, the search coordinator stated, "It is the opinion of the search personnel that they eventually ran out of gas, landed in the ocean, and were unable to stay afloat due to the weight of the aircraft." On January 5, 1939, Amelia Earhart was officially declared dead in absentia in a Los Angeles court. The official conclusion was that Earhart and Noonan had run out of fuel, crashed into the ocean, and perished. This crash and sink theory became the official and most widely accepted explanation for the disappearance. However, even from the beginning, not everyone accepted this conclusion. Various theories began to emerge almost immediately, fueled by reported radio distress calls allegedly received in the days following the disappearance, rumors of Japanese involvement, and the tantalizing possibility that Earhart might have survived, at least for a time, on one of the many uninhabited islands in the region. The crash and sink theory. The simplest and most widely accepted explanation for Earhart's disappearance is the crash and sink theory. According to this scenario, Earhart and Noonan failed to locate Howland Island due to a combination of navigational challenges, radio communication problems, and possibly adverse weather conditions. When their fuel ran out, they were forced to ditch in the ocean. Given the Electra's weight and design, it would have sunk quickly, taking both occupants to the bottom of the Pacific. This theory is supported by several factors. First, Earhart's final radio transmissions clearly indicated she couldn't locate Howland Island and was running low on fuel. The reference to flying at 1,000 feet and later running north and south suggests she was trying to find the island by flying along a line of position, but was unable to see it. The Pacific Ocean near Howland Island is extremely deep, in some places more than 3 miles deep, which would explain why no wreckage was found during the immediate search. The navigational challenges were substantial. Howland Island is extraordinarily small. Finding it would be like finding a needle in a haystack. Any slight error in Noonan's calculations, any deviation from their intended course due to winds, or any mistake in their dead reckoning navigation could have put them miles off course. At an altitude of 1,000 feet, the horizon is only about 40 miles away, meaning they could have been just 50 or 60 miles north or south of Howland Island and been unable to see it. The radio communications problems compounded the navigation difficulties. If Earhart couldn't receive transmissions from the Itasca, she couldn't use radio direction finding to home in on the island. The Itasca's radio operators reported that while they could hear Earhart, She didn't seem to hear them, suggesting a problem with her receiver, or possibly that she wasn't listening on the correct frequency at the times they were transmitting. Weather may also have played a role. While there were no reports of severe storms in the area, there were clouds and possibly limited visibility. This would have made visual spotting of the island more difficult, and would have prevented or complicated celestial navigation. Critics of the crash and sink theory point out that modern searches of the ocean floor around Howland Island using sophisticated sonar and underwater robots have failed to locate any wreckage. However, proponents counter that the search area is vast, the ocean is extremely deep, and wreckage could be buried under sediment or broken up beyond recognition after decades on the ocean floor. The National Transportation Safety Board, in a 2014 peer review of various Earhart disappearance theories, concluded that the crash and sink theory remained the most likely explanation, stating that historical analysis, supported by the archaeological and archival records, most strongly supports the theory that Earhart and Noonan ran out of fuel. The Gardner Island theory. In recent decades, an alternative theory has gained significant traction among researchers and has been the focus of numerous expeditions and extensive forensic analysis. This is the Gardner Island hypothesis, championed primarily by the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, TIGAR. Gardner Island, now known as Nikumaroro, is part of the Phoenix Islands group, located about 350 miles southeast of Howland Island. Importantly, it lies almost exactly on the 157-337 line of position that Earhart mentioned in her final transmission. The island is about 4 miles long and a mile wide, much larger and easier to spot than Howland Island. According to this theory, when Earhart couldn't find Howland Island, she flew southeast along the 157-337 line and eventually spotted Nikumaroro. With fuel running dangerously low, she attempted to land on the island's reef flat during low tide. Some researchers believe she may have successfully landed the plane and survived for a period of time as a castaway before eventually perishing from dehydration, starvation, or other causes. TIGAR has conducted numerous expeditions to Nikumaroro since 1989, searching for evidence of Earhart's presence. They point to several pieces of circumstantial evidence. In 1940, British colonial officer Gerald Gallagher discovered a partial skeleton on Nikumaroro, along with what appeared to be parts of a shoe and a sextant box. The bones were examined by Dr. David Hoodless, who concluded they belonged to a stocky male. The bones were subsequently lost, making re-examination impossible for decades. However, in 1998, forensic anthropologists reanalyzed Dr. Hoodless's measurements using modern techniques and concluded that the bones were more likely to have belonged to a white female of European descent who was tall for her time, characteristics consistent with Earhart. More sophisticated analysis in 2018 using computer modeling and comparison with Earhart's physical measurements suggested the bones were, more likely than not, hers. TIGAR has recovered various artifacts from Nikumaroro that they believe may be connected to Earhart, including pieces of aircraft aluminum that appear to match the type and thickness used in the Electra's construction, a piece of plexiglass consistent with windows from the Electra, and remnants of what might have been a woman's shoe dating to the 1930s. They've also found evidence of campfires and what may have been improvised survival tools. Some researchers have re-examined reports of post-loss radio signals allegedly received from Earhart. In the days and weeks following her disappearance, dozens of people reported picking up distress signals they believed came from Earhart's plane. Most of these were dismissed at the time as hoaxes or misidentifications. However, TIGAR and other researchers have suggested that some of these signals, particularly those received during the first few days after the disappearance, might have been genuine. For these transmissions to have occurred, the Electra would need to have been on land with its engine running to charge the batteries. Nikumaroro's reef flat, exposed at low tide, could have provided such a location for a limited time. Analysis of a photograph taken on Nikumaroro 3 months after Earhart's disappearance appears to show what might be landing gear protruding from the water near the reef. Modern analysis of the photograph by forensic imaging specialists has suggested the object in the image is consistent with the dimensions of the Electra's landing gear, though this interpretation is disputed. Critics of the Gardner Island theory point out that much of the evidence is circumstantial and that definitive proof remains elusive. The bone measurements from 1940, while suggestive, are based on second-hand data from measurements that may have been imprecise. The artifacts recovered from the island, while tantalizing, haven't been definitively proven to be from the Electra, despite multiple expensive expeditions and searches of the waters around Nikumaroro. No substantial aircraft wreckage has been located. Nevertheless, this theory continues to attract serious researchers and remains the most prominent alternative to the crash and sink scenario. Tigar continues to analyze evidence and plans future expeditions to search for more definitive proof. The Japanese capture theory. Another persistent theory suggests that Earhart and Noonan crashed in the Japanese-controlled Marshall Islands, were captured by the Japanese military, and died in captivity. Some versions of this theory suggest they were executed as spies. Others propose they died from disease or injury while imprisoned. This theory gained popular attention with the 1966 publication of Amelia Earhart Lives by Joe Kloss, which suggested Earhart survived and returned to the United States under an assumed identity. More serious variants of the theory emerged from witness testimony collected in the 1960s by CBS radio reporter Fred Gerner and in the 1980s by former Air Force pilot Thomas E. Devine. Several Marshallese natives claim to have witnessed a silver plane crash or landing in the Marshall Islands, and some reported seeing 2 American prisoners, one woman with short hair and one man in Japanese custody. Some witnesses claim to have seen a grave on Saipan that allegedly contained the remains of Earhart and Noonan. In 2017, a photograph purported to show Earhart and Noonan in Japanese custody in the Marshall Islands received significant media attention after being featured in a History Channel documentary. The photograph, allegedly taken in 1937, showed a woman sitting on a dock who some claimed looked like Earhart, and a man who might have been Noonan. However, this photograph was quickly debunked when bloggers discovered it had actually been published in a Japanese travel guide in 1935. 2 years before Earhart's final flight. The Japanese capture theory faces several significant problems. First, there's no credible contemporary documentary evidence from Japanese sources to support it. After World War II, when Japanese military records became available to researchers, no documents relating to Earhart's capture were found. Japanese military veterans and officials consistently denied any knowledge of Earhart being in Japanese custody. Second, the geography doesn't align well with the known facts. The Marshall Islands lie about 800 miles northwest of Howland Island. For Earhart to have reached the Marshalls, she would have had to fly significantly off course in the wrong direction while broadcasting that she was following the 157-337 line through Howland Island. Her final radio transmissions indicated she was searching for Howland Island in its vicinity, not hundreds of miles away. Third, the witness testimony collected decades after the fact is problematic. Memories fade and become contaminated over time, and some researchers have suggested that witnesses may have confused different events or been influenced by the intense media interest in the Earhart story. The U.S. State Department and Navy investigated these claims several times and consistently found them to lack credible evidence. In 1960, when these stories first gained widespread attention, Secretary of State Christian Herter stated that the department had found no evidence supporting the theory that Earhart had been in Japanese custody. Despite the lack of credible evidence, this theory persists in popular culture, perhaps because it offers a more dramatic narrative than the simpler crash and sink scenario. Modern investigations and technology. In recent years, modern technology has enabled new approaches to investigating Earhart's disappearance. High-resolution sonar, autonomous underwater vehicles, sophisticated forensic analysis techniques, and computer modeling have all been brought to bear on the mystery. In 2012, a group of researchers using high-frequency sonar to map the ocean floor near Nikumaroro identified an acoustic anomaly at a depth of about 600 feet that they suggested might be wreckage from the Electra. A subsequent expedition, using a remote-operated underwater vehicle, was unable to conclusively identify the anomaly, though it remains a target for future investigation. Deep-sea explorer Robert Ballard, famous for discovering the wreck of the Titanic, led an expedition in 2019 to search the waters around Nikumaroro and Howland Island using advanced sonar and underwater robots. While the expedition didn't locate any definitive wreckage, Ballard noted that the search area is vast and that wreckage could easily have been missed. He expressed interest in continuing the search with more advanced equipment. Forensic analysis has also advanced significantly. The reanalysis of the bones found on Nikumaroro in 1940 using modern anthropological techniques represents one example. Another involves the analysis of historic photographs using modern digital enhancement and forensic imaging techniques. In 2018, researchers announced they had discovered what they believed was a piece of aluminum from Earhart's plane on Nikumaroro. The artifact, designated as Artifact 22V1, was a small piece of worked aluminum sheet with a distinctive pattern of rivets. Investigators discovered that this piece appeared to match a patch that had been installed on Earhart's Electra to cover a replaced window in Miami before the world flight began. A photograph showing this patch on the Electra was found in the Miami Herald archives. Forensic analysis suggested the rivet pattern and measurements matched the patch. However, without being able to examine the actual aircraft, definitive proof remains elusive. Researchers have also used climate data, ocean current models, and computer simulations to predict where wreckage might have drifted or where castaways might have survived. These studies have helped focus search efforts and evaluate the plausibility of various theories. Despite these technological advances, the fundamental challenge remains. The Pacific Ocean is vast, and finding the remains of a single aircraft after more than 80 years is extraordinarily difficult. The ocean floor near Howland Island is characterized by rugged terrain and extreme depths. Wreckage could be buried under sediment, broken into pieces, or scattered across a wide area by ocean currents over decades. The Earhart Project and continuing research. The search for Amelia Earhart continues to this day, driven by both professional researchers and passionate amateur investigators. Several organizations maintain active research programs. TIGAR continues its research focused on the Nikumaroro hypothesis, conducting analysis of artifacts, planning future expeditions, and advocating for the Gardner Island theory. Their work has introduced scientific rigor to the investigation and has uncovered genuinely intriguing evidence, even if definitive proof remains elusive. The Chasing Earhart project, launched in 2017, has taken a different approach, focusing on deep-sea exploration around Howland Island and working to develop new theories based on analysis of Earhart's final flight path and radio transmissions. Various independent researchers continue to analyze historic records, radio logs, and other documentation, occasionally uncovering new information that sheds light on aspects of the disappearance. The ongoing interest in Earhart's fate isn't purely academic or historical. It speaks to something deeper in the human psyche, our need for closure, our fascination with unsolved mysteries, and our reluctance to accept that someone so famous and accomplished could simply vanish without explanation. Earhart's disappearance has transcended the mere facts of a missing aircraft. It has become a cultural touchstone, a mystery that each generation re-examines with its own perspectives and technologies. What we know for certain. Amid all the theories, speculation, and uncertainty, certain facts about Earhart's final flight are well established. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan departed Lae, New Guinea, on July 2, 1937, at approximately 10 a.m. local time, attempting to fly to Howland Island. The flight was expected to take about 18 hours. The Electra was loaded with enough fuel to fly for approximately 20 to 21 hours, providing a reasonable margin for error. Multiple radio transmissions from Earhart were received by the USS Itasca in the hours leading up to and immediately following the expected time of arrival at Howland Island. These transmissions indicated she was unable to locate the island and was running low on fuel. The final confirmed transmission from Earhart was received at 8:43 a.m. Howland time on July 2, 1937. She reported being on the line 157 to 337 inches and running north and south. No further confirmed communications were received after this final transmission. An immediate and extensive search failed to locate any trace of the aircraft or its occupants. Beyond these established facts, nearly everything else about the final fate of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan remains speculative. We don't know exactly why they couldn't find Howland Island. We don't know precisely where they were when their fuel ran out. We don't know whether they crashed at sea, reached another island, or survived for any period after their last transmission. The most likely scenario, based on the available evidence, most aviation experts, historians, and government officials who have studied the case conclude that Earhart and Noonan most likely ran out of fuel and crashed into the Pacific Ocean near Howland Island. This conclusion is based on the content and timing of the radio transmissions, which clearly indicate they were in the vicinity of Howland Island, searching for it, and critically low on fuel. The navigational challenges of finding such a small target in the vast Pacific, particularly with the radio communications problems they were experiencing, the lack of any credible contemporary evidence of their presence elsewhere, the fact that similar accidents, pilots becoming lost, and running out of fuel over water have occurred numerous times in aviation history. However, the Gardner Island theory cannot be completely dismissed. The presence of the 1940 bones, which modern analysis suggests may have been Earhart's, the various artifacts found on Nikumaroro that could potentially be from the Electra, and the island's position on the 157-337 line of position all provide circumstantial support for this theory. If Earhart couldn't find Howland Island and flew southeast along the 157-337 line, Nikumaroro would have been the first substantial piece of land she would have encountered. The Japanese capture theory, despite its persistence in popular culture, lacks credible supporting evidence and is contradicted by known facts about the flight path and radio transmissions. Why the mystery endures. More than 85 years after Amelia Earhart's disappearance, the question of what really happened continues to captivate public imagination. This enduring fascination stems from several factors. First, Earhart herself was a remarkable figure who transcended her aviation accomplishments to become a cultural icon. She represented possibility and potential at a time when society imposed strict limitations on women. Her disappearance robbed the world of her continued advocacy and inspiration. Second, the mystery involves classic elements that capture our imagination. A famous person, a dramatic disappearance, vast unexplored territory, and a puzzle that has resisted solution despite determined efforts to solve it. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures who find uncertainty uncomfortable. We want closure and explanations. Third, the story offers something for everyone. Those who prefer simple, rational explanations can accept the crash and sink theory. Those attracted to more elaborate scenarios can explore the Gardner Island hypothesis with its castaway narrative. Those drawn to conspiracy theories can indulge in tales of government cover-ups and Japanese plots. Fourth, modern technology keeps offering the promise that we might finally solve the mystery. Each new expedition, each new piece of analysis, each technological advance raises the hope that this time we'll find the definitive answer. The fact that we haven't yet doesn't diminish the hope that we might soon. Finally, the mystery allows each generation to project its own values and concerns onto the story. In the immediate aftermath of the disappearance, people saw it through the lens of approaching World War and international tensions. During the Cold War, it was interpreted through the prism of espionage and covert operations. Today, we examine it with tools of forensic science and gender studies, asking different questions and seeking different kinds of answers than previous generations. Conclusion: living with uncertainty. What really happened to Amelia Earhart? The honest answer, based on all available evidence, and despite decades of investigation, is that we don't know with certainty. The most likely scenario, that she and Fred Noonan ran out of fuel, crashed into the Pacific Ocean, and perished, lacks the definitive proof of discovered wreckage or recovered remains. Alternative theories, while intriguing, similarly lack conclusive evidence.